What if I told you that the most intricate, sophisticated coordination systems humanity has ever witnessed emerged not from grand design, but from what appears to be complete chaos? Every morning, millions of Americans wake up to find fresh bread in their local bakeries, gasoline at nearby stations, and countless products perfectly arranged on store shelves. Yet no central authority orchestrated this miracle. No single mind calculated the precise quantities needed, the optimal delivery routes, or the perfect timing. This is the beautiful paradox I've spent decades studying, how order emerges from apparent disorder through spontaneous coordination. The conventional mind seeks a conductor for this symphony, someone pulling the strings behind the curtain. But this search reveals our deepest intellectual conceit, the belief that complex order requires conscious design. Today, we'll explore how chaos becomes coordination, how millions of individual decisions create patterns more elegant than any planner could devise, and why this understanding is crucial for preserving the freedom and prosperity we often take for granted. The implications will challenge everything you thought you knew about social organization. Chapter 1: The Knowledge That No One Possesses. During my years observing wartime economies in Austria, I witnessed firsthand the impossible task facing central planners. They possessed impressive credentials, detailed statistics, and unwavering confidence in their ability to coordinate production. Yet they consistently failed to achieve what free markets accomplish effortlessly every day. This wasn't due to incompetence or corruption. It revealed a fundamental limitation of human knowledge that strikes at the heart of all social coordination. The knowledge required to coordinate a modern economy exists nowhere in its totality. Consider something as simple as a pencil. Its creation requires knowledge of graphite mining in Sri Lanka, cedar forests in California, rubber plantation techniques in Malaysia, metal fabrication for the ferrule, and paint chemistry for the yellow coating. But this is merely the beginning. Each component requires specialized machinery, transportation networks, timing coordination, and quality standards. The knowledge extends to understanding local labor conditions, regional weather patterns, currency fluctuations, and consumer preferences across different markets. No single person, no matter how brilliant, could possibly possess even a fraction of this dispersed knowledge. Yet somehow, pencils appear reliably in stores worldwide at affordable prices. This coordination occurs not because someone knows everything, but because the price system enables millions of people to share their specialized knowledge through voluntary exchange. When cedar becomes scarce, higher prices signal this information instantly to producers and consumers worldwide, triggering countless adaptive responses without any central command. The failure to grasp this knowledge problem leads to what I call the fatal conceit, the belief that human reason can design social institutions superior to those that emerge spontaneously. This conceit is particularly seductive to intellectuals, who mistake their mastery of abstract concepts for understanding of practical, contextual knowledge that can only be discovered through market processes. Central planners inevitably rely on aggregated statistics and theoretical models that strip away the local, tacit knowledge essential for effective coordination. They cannot access the subtle insights of the entrepreneur who notices changing consumer preferences, the worker who discovers more efficient production methods, or the trader who identifies new arbitrage opportunities. This knowledge emerges from direct engagement with specific circumstances and cannot be transmitted through reports or statistical summaries. Chapter 2: Cosmos versus Taxis, Two Types of Order. The Greeks understood something we've forgotten in our modern obsession with design and control. They distinguished between two fundamentally different types of order, cosmos and taxis. Cosmos represents spontaneous order, the kind that emerges naturally from the interactions of independent elements following simple rules. Taxis represents constructed order, the kind imposed deliberately by conscious design. Understanding this distinction is crucial for comprehending why free societies flourish while planned societies stagnate. Consider the English language. No committee designed its grammar, no authority determined its vocabulary, and no central planner coordinated its evolution. Yet English exhibits extraordinary complexity and functionality, adapting continuously to new circumstances while maintaining internal consistency. This is cosmos, order that emerges from countless individual innovations, adoptions, and refinements over centuries. The language serves purposes no designer anticipated and solves communication problems no planner foresaw. Contrast this with Esperanto, a constructed language designed by committee to be perfectly logical and universally accessible. Despite its rational structure and noble intentions, Esperanto never achieved widespread adoption. Why? Because designed order, however elegant in theory, cannot match the adaptive flexibility of spontaneous order. Languages that emerge naturally incorporate countless subtle distinctions, cultural nuances, and practical considerations that no designer could anticipate or replicate. The same principle applies to legal systems. Common law, which evolved through centuries of judicial decisions responding to specific disputes, demonstrates remarkable adaptability and practical wisdom. Judges didn't set out to create a comprehensive legal system, they simply resolved individual cases based on precedent and practical reasoning. Yet this spontaneous process generated legal principles more sophisticated and responsive than most designed legal codes. Markets represent perhaps the most elegant example of spontaneous order. No one designed the price system, yet it coordinates the productive activities of billions of people with extraordinary efficiency. Prices emerge from countless individual transactions, each reflecting specific circumstances and preferences. This decentralized process aggregates dispersed information and coordinates complex production networks in ways that surpass any conceivable planning mechanism. The beauty of spontaneous order lies in its capacity for continuous adaptation and improvement. Unlike designed systems, which require conscious modification by their creators, spontaneous orders evolve naturally in response to changing circumstances. They incorporate new information automatically, abandon ineffective practices, and discover novel solutions through experimentation and selection. However, spontaneous order requires appropriate institutions and rules to function effectively. Just as language requires grammar and markets require property rights, Cosmos needs a stable framework within which spontaneous coordination can occur. This is where constitutional design becomes crucial, not to plan outcomes, but to establish the conditions for spontaneous order to flourish. Chapter 3: The Price System, Humanity's Information Network. Imagine trying to coordinate the daily activities of 8 billion people without any communication system. The task seems impossible, yet this is precisely what the price system accomplishes every day. Prices represent humanity's most sophisticated information network, transmitting knowledge with a speed and accuracy that surpasses any designed communication system. Understanding how this mechanism works reveals why market economies consistently outperform planned alternatives. When drought strikes wheat-growing regions, this local knowledge immediately becomes global information through price increases. Consumers worldwide receive this signal without knowing anything about meteorological conditions in Kansas or Ukraine. They simply observe higher bread prices and adjust their consumption accordingly. Simultaneously, producers of wheat substitutes see profit opportunities and increase production. Farmers in unaffected regions plant more wheat in response to higher prices. This coordination occurs automatically, without any central authority collecting information, analyzing alternatives, or issuing instructions. The genius of the price system lies in its ability to distill vastly complex information into simple numerical signals that guide decision-making. Each price incorporates countless factors: resource availability, production costs, consumer preferences, technological capabilities, transportation expenses, and risk assessments. No central planner could possibly collect, process, and act upon this information with comparable speed and accuracy. Consider how prices coordinate the timing of economic activity across different stages of production. When consumer demand for computers increases, higher prices for finished products signal profit opportunities to computer manufacturers. This triggers increased demand for semiconductors, which raises semiconductor prices and signals expansion opportunities to chip producers. The price increases cascade backward through the production structure, automatically coordinating investment decisions across multiple industries and time horizons. But prices do more than convey information, they provide incentives for acting on that information appropriately. When gasoline prices rise due to refinery disruptions, consumers have personal reasons to reduce consumption, seek alternatives, or postpone non-essential trips. Producers have profitable incentives to increase supply, develop substitute products, or invest in additional capacity. The price system aligns individual self-interest with social coordination automatically. This incentive mechanism explains why price controls invariably create shortages and surpluses. When governments suppress prices below market levels, they sever the connection between information and incentives. Consumers receive false signals suggesting abundance, while producers get false signals suggesting reduced profitability. The result is predictable: excessive consumption, insufficient production, and coordination failures that no amount of administrative oversight can remedy. The alternative to market prices is some form of administrative coordination, but this faces insurmountable informational and computational challenges. Central planners must somehow collect, process, and act upon the same information that markets aggregate automatically through voluntary exchange. They must anticipate consumer preferences, predict technological developments, assess resource constraints, and coordinate production decisions across millions of interdependent activities. The task requires knowledge that exists nowhere in consolidated form and computational capabilities that exceed any conceivable technology. Modern economies demonstrate the price system's remarkable power daily through global supply chains, financial markets, and digital platforms that coordinate economic activity across vast distances and complex networks with minimal conscious oversight. Chapter 4: The Fatal Conceit of the Planning Mind. The most dangerous ideas are often the most appealing to intelligent minds. Throughout my career, I've observed how intellectual brilliance can become a liability when it breeds confidence in the ability to design complex social systems. This phenomenon, which I call the fatal conceit, represents one of the greatest threats to human prosperity and freedom. It stems from our natural tendency to mistake theoretical understanding for practical wisdom and to assume that conscious design can improve upon spontaneous processes. The planning mentality emerges from a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex systems function. Observing the elegant coordination of market economies, intellectuals naturally seek to identify the mechanism responsible for this order. Finding no central controller, they conclude that conscious design could achieve superior results through rational planning. This reasoning contains a profound error. It assumes that order requires a designer and that human reason can replicate or improve upon processes that emerged through evolutionary selection. This conceit becomes particularly seductive during economic difficulties or social problems. When markets experience disruptions, unemployment rises, or inequalities become apparent, the planning mind sees opportunities for improvement through conscious intervention. Surely, they reason, intelligent policymakers armed with economic models and statistical data can achieve better outcomes than the seemingly chaotic interactions of private individuals pursuing their own interests. History provides sobering evidence of this fallacy's consequences. The Soviet Union assembled some of the world's most talented economists, mathematicians, and engineers to design their planned economy. They possessed detailed input-output models, sophisticated planning algorithms, and unlimited political authority to implement their designs. Yet they consistently fail to match the prosperity achieved by market economies, despite enormous natural resources and human capital. The failure wasn't due to inadequate intelligence or insufficient commitment. It reflected the inherent impossibility of the task they attempted. No planning authority, however brilliant, can access the dispersed knowledge required for effective economic coordination. The tacit knowledge possessed by individual producers, consumers, and entrepreneurs cannot be collected, transmitted, and processed by central agencies. It exists only in the minds of people directly engaged with specific circumstances and emerges through their practical experience. Moreover, the planning mindset undermines the very processes through which useful knowledge is discovered. Markets function as discovery mechanisms, revealing information about consumer preferences, production possibilities, and resource constraints through voluntary exchange. When planners substitute their judgments for market processes, they eliminate these discovery mechanisms and must rely instead on theoretical assumptions about how the economy should function. The fatal conceit extends beyond economics into social policy, where well-intentioned reformers seek to improve upon traditional institutions through rational design. They observe perceived deficiencies in family structures, educational systems, or community organizations and propose comprehensive reforms based on theoretical models of optimal social arrangements. Yet these institutions evolved through cultural selection processes that tested countless variations over generations, preserving those that served human needs effectively. This doesn't mean that all traditional institutions are perfect or that conscious reform is always misguided. Rather, it suggests that we should approach social engineering with profound humility, recognizing that our theoretical understanding may be inferior to the practical wisdom embedded in evolved institutions. Chapter 5: How Institutions Evolve Without Design. The most remarkable feature of human civilization is not what we consciously created, but what emerged spontaneously from our interactions over countless generations. Language, law, money, markets, and moral systems all developed through evolutionary processes that no one planned or controlled. Understanding how institutions evolve without design provides crucial insights into the sources of social order and the conditions necessary for human flourishing. Consider the evolution of money, perhaps the most elegant example of spontaneous institutional development. No government committee decided that certain commodities should serve as media of exchange. Instead, money emerged from the practical difficulties people faced in barter systems. When direct exchange became cumbersome, individuals discovered that certain goods, salt, cattle, precious metals, were more widely accepted than others. Over time, these commodities became conventional means of payment, not because authorities mandated their use, but because they solved coordination problems more effectively than alternatives. The properties that made certain commodities successful as money, durability, divisibility, portability, recognizability, weren't planned features but emerged through a selection process. Communities that adopted inferior monetary systems faced coordination difficulties and economic disadvantages compared to those using superior media of exchange. This competitive pressure gradually favored monetary systems with characteristics that facilitated trade and economic calculation. Common law provides another compelling illustration of institutional evolution. Rather than beginning with comprehensive legal codes, English law developed through centuries of judicial decisions addressing specific disputes. Judges didn't attempt to create a complete legal system. They simply resolved individual cases based on precedent, custom, and practical reasoning. Yet this bottom-up process generated legal principles and procedures that proved remarkably adaptable and effective. The evolutionary process works through variation, selection, and retention. In legal systems, different courts experiment with various interpretations and procedures. Some prove more effective at resolving disputes, maintaining social order, and facilitating cooperation. These successful innovations spread to other jurisdictions, while less effective approaches are abandoned. Over time, this process accumulates practical wisdom about legal arrangements that serve human needs. Cultural evolution operates similarly in moral systems, where different societies develop varying norms and practices for governing behavior. Those that promote cooperation, trust, and mutual benefit tend to flourish, while societies with dysfunctional moral systems struggle with internal conflict and coordination failures. The result is gradual convergence toward moral principles that facilitate social cooperation, though significant variations persist due to different historical experiences and environmental challenges. This evolutionary perspective explains why conscious attempts to redesign institutions often produce disappointing results. Reformers typically focus on perceived deficiencies in existing arrangements without fully understanding the functions these institutions serve or the unintended consequences of proposed changes. They may eliminate beneficial features while failing to replicate the subtle mechanisms that made original institutions effective. However, understanding institutional evolution doesn't require passive acceptance of all existing arrangements. Rather, it suggests adopting an experimental approach that builds upon evolutionary insights. Instead of comprehensive redesign, successful reform typically involves gradual modifications that preserve beneficial features while addressing specific problems. This approach allows for learning from experience and adjustment based on results. The key insight is that effective institutions emerge from processes that test numerous variations against practical criteria over extended periods. Conscious design can contribute to this process, but it cannot replace the discovery mechanisms inherent in evolutionary development. Chapter 6: Liberty as the Foundation of Spontaneous Order. Freedom is not merely a political slogan or philosophical ideal. It is the essential precondition for spontaneous order to emerge and flourish. Without liberty, the discovery processes that generate complex coordination cannot function effectively. Understanding this connection between freedom and order reveals why protecting individual rights serves not just moral purposes but practical necessities for social cooperation and economic prosperity. Spontaneous order requires that individuals possess the freedom to experiment, innovate, and respond to changing circumstances according to their own knowledge and judgment. When government restricts these freedoms through excessive regulation, central planning, or coercive redistribution, it disrupts the mechanisms through which useful knowledge is discovered and transmitted. The result is not just reduced efficiency but systemic breakdown of coordination processes that market economies rely upon. Consider entrepreneurship, which represents perhaps the most important form of economic experimentation. Entrepreneurs succeed by discovering previously unrecognized opportunities, developing innovative products and services, or finding more efficient production methods. This discovery process requires freedom to enter markets, compete with established firms, hire employees, access capital, and retain profits from successful innovations. When governments restrict these freedoms through licensing requirements, price controls, or punitive taxation, they reduce entrepreneurial incentives and limit the economy's capacity for adaptation and improvement. The connection between liberty and order extends beyond economics to all forms of social coordination. Scientific progress depends on researchers' freedom to pursue unconventional hypotheses, challenge established theories, and communicate their findings openly. When political authorities restrict scientific inquiry or suppress dissenting views, they undermine the discovery processes through which knowledge advances. Historical examples from Soviet genetics to Nazi physics demonstrate how authoritarian control destroys scientific progress even when governments claim to support research. Similarly, cultural evolution requires freedom for individuals and communities to experiment with different ways of life, moral systems, and social arrangements. Societies that permit such experimentation can discover more effective institutions and practices, while those that enforce rigid conformity stagnate and eventually decline. The diversity of approaches that liberty permits serves as a form of social insurance, ensuring that at least some communities will develop institutions capable of addressing new challenges. However, liberty must be understood correctly to serve these functions effectively. True freedom is not licensed to do anything one pleases, but rather the absence of coercion by others, particularly government authorities. This requires a framework of general rules, what I call the rule of law, that applies equally to all individuals and limits the arbitrary exercise of power. Without such rules, liberty degenerates into chaos, making productive cooperation impossible. The rule of law serves spontaneous order by creating stable expectations that enable long-term planning and investment. When individuals know that contracts will be enforced, property rights protected, and general rules applied consistently, they can engage in complex cooperative arrangements that extend across time and space. This institutional framework doesn't plan specific outcomes but creates conditions within which spontaneous coordination can flourish. Constitutional government represents humanity's greatest institutional innovation for protecting liberty while maintaining order. By limiting government power through written constitutions, separation of powers, and individual rights protections, constitutional systems prevent authorities from disrupting spontaneous coordination processes through arbitrary intervention. This doesn't mean government has no role, but rather that its role should be confined to maintaining the framework within which voluntary cooperation occurs. The alternative to liberty is not order but a different kind of chaos, the chaos that results when knowledge discovery processes are suppressed and coordination mechanisms are disrupted by coercive intervention. Chapter 7: Digital Age Spontaneous Order, Cryptocurrency and Beyond. The digital revolution has provided remarkable new examples of spontaneous order that validate principles I developed decades ago. Cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, represent perhaps the most elegant demonstration of how decentralized systems can emerge without central design and achieve coordination superior to planned alternatives. These innovations offer compelling evidence that spontaneous order principles remain relevant and powerful in our technologically advanced world. Bitcoin emerged not from government monetary policy or central bank design, but from the interactions of programmers, entrepreneurs, and users seeking alternatives to traditional financial systems. No central authority controls Bitcoin's supply, validates transactions, or determines its value. Instead, a decentralized network of participants maintains the system through voluntary cooperation guided by algorithmic rules. This represents precisely the kind of spontaneous coordination I described in my theoretical work on money and information. The cryptocurrency ecosystem demonstrates how complex institutions can evolve without conscious planning. Bitcoin's original design has spawned thousands of variations, each experimenting with different approaches to digital money. Some emphasize privacy, others focus on transaction speed, and still others explore programmable contracts. This evolutionary process mirrors the historical development of monetary systems, where different communities experimented with various media of exchange until superior forms emerged through market selection. Perhaps most significantly, cryptocurrencies solve the knowledge problem that plagues centralized monetary systems. Central banks must somehow determine appropriate money supplies, interest rates, and regulatory policies for entire economies. They lack access to the dispersed information about individual preferences, market conditions, and economic relationships that would enable effective monetary management. Decentralized cryptocurrency networks, by contrast, aggregate this information automatically through market processes, allowing supply and demand to determine monetary conditions without central planning. The Internet itself exemplifies spontaneous order on a global scale. No single authority designed the World Wide Web or planned its current structure. Instead, it emerged from countless individual innovations, improvements, and adaptations by programmers, entrepreneurs, and users responding to evolving needs and opportunities. The protocols that govern Internet communication developed through voluntary cooperation and competitive selection rather than top-down design. Modern e-commerce platforms demonstrate how digital technologies can facilitate spontaneous coordination across vast networks. Amazon's marketplace enables millions of sellers to reach billions of customers without centralized inventory management or price setting. The platform provides information and incentive systems that allow market forces to coordinate supply and demand automatically. Prices adjust continuously based on availability and demand. Sellers compete to improve service and reduce costs, and customers' choices shape product offerings and delivery options. Social media networks reveal both the power and limitations of spontaneous digital order. These platforms emerged organically as individuals sought new ways to communicate and share information. No central planner designed Twitter's hashtag system, Facebook's social graph, or YouTube's recommendation algorithms. These features evolved through user experimentation and platform adaptation. However, the concentration of power in major technology companies also demonstrates how spontaneous order can generate outcomes that require careful institutional design to maintain competitive markets and protect individual freedoms. The blockchain technology underlying cryptocurrencies offers broader applications for decentralized coordination. Smart contracts can automate complex agreements without requiring trusted third parties. Decentralized autonomous organizations explore new forms of governance that minimize reliance on traditional hierarchical management. These innovations suggest possibilities for applying spontaneous order principles to domains previously dominated by centralized institutions. However, digital spontaneous order faces challenges that require appropriate regulatory frameworks. Governments struggle to apply traditional regulatory approaches to decentralized systems that transcend national boundaries and operate without central authorities. The key insight from spontaneous order theory is that regulation should focus on maintaining competitive conditions and protecting property rights rather than planning specific outcomes or suppressing innovation. Conclusion. The beautiful chaos that creates order surrounds us constantly, yet we rarely pause to appreciate its elegance or understand its mechanisms. From the morning coffee that appears reliably in our local cafe to the sophisticated global supply chains that deliver products from around the world, spontaneous coordination accomplishes feats that would be impossible through conscious design. This understanding carries profound implications for how we organize society and approach public policy. Instead of assuming that complex problems require centralized solutions, we should ask how we can create conditions for spontaneous order to emerge. Instead of seeking to control outcomes through planning, we should focus on establishing institutional frameworks that enable discovery and coordination through voluntary cooperation. The knowledge problem that frustrates central planners is not a technical challenge to be overcome through better computers or more sophisticated models. It reflects fundamental limitations of human cognition that no amount of technological progress can eliminate. The dispersed, tacit knowledge essential for social coordination can only be accessed and utilized through decentralized processes that respect individual freedom and market mechanisms. As we face new challenges in the digital age, from cryptocurrency regulation to artificial intelligence governance, these insights become more relevant than ever. The temptation to manage technological change through comprehensive planning will be enormous, but history suggests that spontaneous adaptation will prove more effective than top-down control. Our task is to ensure that institutions evolve to support rather than suppress the discovery processes that have generated human prosperity and progress.